Hunted Down by Charles Dickens. Part 1. Most people have a chance to see exciting events in their life. I am chief manager of the insurance office. I too have seen exciting things in my 30 years of work. My office at one room, it was covered in glass. I could see everybody who came into the insurance company. I liked to study the faces of new customers before I spoke to them. I decided what kind of people they were before they said a word to me. I learned to trust my first impression of people. The story I want to tell is about a man who came into the company one day. I watched him through the glass of our office. He seemed about 40 years old, and he was very well dressed. He seemed very polite, and he appeared to be quite a gentleman. He was talking to one of the clerks. Despite his appearance, I disliked this man as soon as I saw him. Suddenly, a man noticed I was looking at him. He smiled at me through the glass. Then he took some papers from the clerk and left. A few minutes later, I called the clerk into my office. "Who was that man?" I asked him. "That was Mr. Julius Slington," the clerk told me. "He's from the Middle Temple." "What did you want?" I inquired. "I wanted one of their insurance form," the clerk replied. He said that a friend of yours recommended this company. "He knew my name then, did he?" "Oh yes, Mr. Sampson," the clerk confirmed. "They knew your name." About 2 weeks later, I went to have dinner with a friend of mine. One of the other guests was Mr. Julius Slington. He was standing near a fire. He noticed me and asked our host to introduce him to me. Our host took it over. The three of us began to talk. "I thought you knew Mr. Sampson already," our host said. "No," Mr. Smithson told him. "I followed your advice. I went into the insurance office, but I didn't speak to Mr. Sampson. I didn't want to disturb him." "Did you come to the office to take out an insurance policy?" asked Mr. Snington politely. "Was it a life insurance policy?" "It's not a policy for me," Mrs. Snington said. "It's for a friend of mine. He asked me to get the information for him. I don't know whether he will take out the policy. People often change their minds. Don't you think, Miss Sampson?" "Yes," I replied. We began to talk about other things. "Your profession has suffered a great loss," Mrs. Snington said suddenly. I did not know what she was talking about. "A loss?" I asked in surprise. "What kind of loss, sir?" "A financial one?" Mrs. Snington laughed. "Ha! I don't mean a financial loss," he explained. "I was referring to Mr. Melton." Now I understood what he was talking about. "Ah, yes, Mr. Melton," I agreed. That was indeed a sad loss. He was the most brilliant man I have ever known in the insurance profession. But you know Mr. Wilson? I asked. I knew his reputation, Mrs. Linton told me. What a sad story it is. A young man like that suddenly gives up his business and ties from the world. I have said I just liked Mrs. Linton when I first saw him in the insurance office. I still disliked him. I do not think he was really sad about Mr. Melton at home. I decided to ask Mr. Linton some questions. I wanted to find out more about this man. Have you heard why Mr. Melton left his business? I asked. I have only heard stories about it, he said. Apparently, Mr. Melton was unhappy in love. That's not the truth, I told him. The truth is that the lady died. She died, did she? Mrs. Linton repeated. That's terrible. Poor Mr. Melton. How very sad for him. I still felt that Mrs. Linton was not sincere. There was something false about his expression of sadness. Then he said to me, "You are surprised that Mr. Melton's story affects me so strongly. I can see that, Mr. Sampson, that I too have suffered a terrible loss recently. I have 2 nieces, you see. One of them, a girl of 23, died recently. The other niece is also not well. The world is a very sad place." Now I thought I understood Mrs. Linton. He was a sensitive man who suffered. I was angry with myself for disliking him. I watched him for the rest of the evening, and he seemed to be a good man. He talked politely to everybody, and everybody seemed to like him. I decided that my first impression of Mrs. Linton was wrong. I spoke to our host about Mrs. Linton. He told me that he had not known him for very long.